John was a simple man who loved peace and quiet more than anything else. He had worked for many years in the city, saving every coin, and when the time finally came, he bought a small home on the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was his dream place. The house had a big yard with tall grass, a few old trees, and plenty of open sky. The first thing John wanted was a fence. He wasn't trying to shut anyone out, but he wanted to make a clear line, a sign that this was his land, his safe space. With his own hands, he cut the wood, measured the posts, and hammered each nail with patience. Neighbors often saw him working in the evenings, his shirt damp with sweat but his face calm. Every piece of wood carried his effort, and by the end of the summer, the fence stood strong. To John, that fence was not just wood and nails. It was a promise of freedom. He had lived in crowded apartments before, where walls were thin, and rules were plenty. Now, for the first time, he could sit on his porch without noise, without anyone telling him what he could or couldn't do. Across the street lived Karen. She was known as the loud voice of the neighborhood. She had been the president of the local homeowners association, the HOA, for nearly 10 years. Most people didn't argue with her because she was strict. She wanted all houses to look the same, all fences to be the same color, and even the gardens to be trimmed in her style. When Karen first noticed John's new fence, she frowned. It was not the plain white type she approved of. Instead, John's fence was wooden, with a natural brown finish. It looked different, and Karen did not like different. One morning, as John was watering the small patch of flowers near his porch, Karen walked across the street, holding a neat folder. She stopped at the edge of his yard, just outside the fence. "Good morning, John," she said in a polite but sharp tone. John looked up and smiled gently. "Morning, Karen. How are you today?" "I am fine," she replied, though her eyes were fixed on the fence. "I came to talk about the rules of this neighborhood. As a new homeowner, you must join our HOA. It keeps everything in order. Everyone pays their fees, and everyone follows the guidelines. It makes our community better." John listened carefully, his hands resting on the watering can. He had heard of HOAs before, but he had chosen this property because it was not under one. That was part of the reason he loved it. "Thank you, Karen," he said kindly, "but I'm not interested in joining. I like keeping things simple, and I prefer to take care of my place in my own way." Karen's polite smile began to fade. "Oh, I think you don't understand. It's not optional. It's for the good of the community. Look at that fence brown wood. That's not the standard. It must be white, like everyone else's. And the flowers you need approval for the kind you plant. That's how we do things here." John shook his head gently. "This property is not listed under your HOA, Karen. I checked carefully before I bought it. I'm outside your lines. That's why I'm here. I want to live free." Karen blinked, surprised for a moment. Then her tone grew firmer. "You might not think you're under the rules, but we'll see about that. Our community works best when everyone follows the same path. A place without rules becomes messy." John remained calm. "I respect rules, but only fair ones. I keep my yard clean. I build my fence with care. I am not here to cause trouble." Karen pressed her lips together, as if she didn't like what she was hearing. She tucked her folder under her arm and turned to leave. Before walking away, she said, "We'll talk again, John. Think about what I said." As she walked back across the street, John felt a heaviness settle in his chest. He knew that look in her eyes. She wasn't finished. That evening, John sat on his porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees. The fence stood tall, glowing softly in the golden light. He thought about Karen's words, about rules and control. He had no problem being a good neighbor. He believed in kindness and respect, but he would not let anyone take away the freedom he had worked so hard for. The crickets began their nightly song, and John leaned back in his chair. He whispered to himself, "This fence will stand." The days passed slowly, and John returned to his routine. He watered his flowers in the morning, trimmed the grass on weekends, and sometimes sat with a cup of tea on his porch, watching the world go by. Life felt steady, just as he had dreamed. But Karen was not the type to let things go. She had spent years controlling the look of every house under the HOA, and she believed strongly that her word kept the community perfect. John's wooden fence, standing proud and different, seemed like a challenge to her. One bright Saturday morning, John was painting a small birdhouse he had made. The birds often flew around his yard, and he thought it would be nice to give them a little home on the fence. As he dipped his brush into the paint, he noticed Karen walking across the street again. She held the same folder in her hand, this time thicker than before. She stopped outside his fence, her chin lifted. "John," she called. John set the brush down and looked up. "Good morning, Karen." "This has gone on long enough," she said firmly. "I brought the official HOA agreement. You need to sign it and join. Everyone here has done so. We cannot allow exceptions." John stood, brushing the paint off his hands with a rag. He walked closer to the fence but kept his tone calm. "Karen, I told you before, this property is not under your HOA. I checked all the records. That's why I bought this land. I like it as it is." Karen pulled out several papers from her folder, flipping through them quickly. "These are the community guidelines. White fences only. Grass no higher than 2 inches. Flower beds must be approved. Holiday decorations taken down within 2 weeks. These rules keep our neighborhood clean and respected." John listened quietly, his eyes steady. "I respect that you want things neat, Karen. But my fence is my choice. My flowers are my choice. My home is my responsibility. That's the reason I came here to live free of all that paperwork." Karen frowned. "You are being selfish, John. You think you can enjoy all the benefits of our community without following the rules? That is unfair to your neighbors. We all work hard to keep this place perfect." John shook his head slowly. "I am not asking anyone to change for me. I mow my yard, I keep things clean. I am a good neighbor in my own way. That is enough." Karen's voice grew sharper. "Enough? No, it is not enough. People notice your fence. They ask me why it is different. If one person ignores the rules, soon others will too. That is how order is lost." John sighed softly. He could see the determination in her eyes. It was not really about his fence or flowers. It was about control. Karen believed order meant sameness. But to John, order meant peace, the ability to live without trouble. "Karen," he said gently, "I respect you. I know you care about this place. But I will not sign your papers. I cannot live by rules that do not belong to me. I am outside your HOA, and I plan to stay that way." For a moment, Karen was silent. Her lips pressed into a thin line, and she looked at the fence as if it offended her. Finally, she tucked the papers back into the folder. You think you can stand alone, John, she said coldly. But you will see that a community is stronger than one man. If you do not join, there will be consequences. John met her gaze calmly. I am not afraid of standing alone. I only ask to be left in peace. Karen turned sharply and walked back across the street. Her footsteps were quick, her shoulders stiff. John watched her go, a small knot forming in his chest. He had hoped she would eventually accept his decision, but now he could feel the storm building. That evening, John sat on his porch again, the birdhouse now hanging on the fence, swinging gently in the breeze. The golden light of sunset fell across his yard, and he tried to enjoy the beauty of it. But Karen's words echoed in his mind, there will be consequences. He wondered what she meant. Perhaps she would send more letters. Perhaps she would come back with more arguments. Or maybe she would try something else entirely. John was not a man who liked conflict, but he had learned one thing in life: peace is not always given, it must sometimes be protected. As the stars began to appear in the sky, he promised himself that he would stand firm. His fence was more than wood. It was his freedom, and he was not ready to give it up. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky with orange light, John sat on his porch sipping tea. The air was still, the kind of stillness that feels heavy. Suddenly, he noticed two men walking slowly down the road toward his house. He had never seen them before. They were not dressed like neighbors, no gardening gloves, no shopping bags, no friendly smiles. Instead, they wore dark jackets and moved with a kind of purpose that didn't belong in a peaceful neighborhood. John set his teacup down and watched. The men stopped outside his wooden fence. One of them leaned against the post while the other crossed his arms. You, John? The taller man asked. John stood, brushing the dust from his hands. He didn't like the way they spoke, but he kept his voice calm. Yes, I'm John. Can I help you? The taller man looked at the fence, then back at John. We hear you don't want to join the HOA. That's not smart. John felt the weight of the words, but he kept his face steady. This property is not under the HOA. I bought it that way on purpose. The second man, shorter and rounder, laughed a little. Doesn't matter what you think. People around here follow the rules. You should too. John shook his head. I follow rules that are fair. But this is my home, my land. I take care of it, and I won't let anyone tell me otherwise. The taller man stepped a little closer to the fence. His voice was low, but sharp. It'll be easier if you just agree. Sign the papers. Pay the fees. Do what Karen says. You don't want to make this hard. For a moment, John looked at them in silence. Then he placed both hands on the top of his fence, leaning forward slightly. His voice was calm, almost soft, but it carried strength. This fence is here for a reason. It marks the line between what's mine and what's not. You're standing outside that line, and I'd like you to stay there. I don't want trouble. I want peace. The two men exchanged glances. The shorter one gave a small smirk. Peace? Then join the HOA. That's all Karen wants. John's eyes narrowed just a little. Peace doesn't come from forcing people. It comes from respect. I respect my neighbors. I respect this land. But I won't be bullied into something I never agreed to. There was silence for a moment. The men seemed to expect John to give in, but he didn't. He stood calmly, his hands resting on the fence like roots planted firmly in the earth. Finally, the taller man muttered, "We'll be back." Then, without another word, the two turned and walked away down the street. John watched until they disappeared around the corner. His chest was steady, but inside, he felt a knot tighten. He knew exactly where those men had come from. Karen had sent them. That night, John sat in his living room, the light of the lamp casting soft shadows on the walls. He thought about the fence, the men, and Karen's words. This was no longer about paint colors or flower beds. This was about power. He walked to the mantel where his father's old hunting rifle rested. It hadn't been fired in years. To John, it wasn't a weapon, it was a reminder of his father's lessons. A man doesn't start trouble, his father used to say, but he doesn't back away when protecting what's his. John picked up the rifle for a moment, feeling the weight of it. He remembered the days as a boy, when his father taught him about responsibility. A tool is only as good as the hands that hold it, his father had said. It can bring harm, or it can bring safety. It all depends on the heart behind it. Placing the rifle back on the mantel, John whispered, "I only want safety." The crickets chirped outside, filling the night with sound. John returned to his chair by the window, looking out at the fence glowing faintly under the moonlight. It stood firm, just as he hoped to. The next morning, John saw Karen standing on her porch across the street, speaking quietly on her phone. When she noticed him watching, she turned away quickly. It was clear now she had no plan of stopping. John breathed deeply and told himself, "This isn't just about me anymore. It's about standing for what's right." The next few days carried a strange silence. The two men had not returned, but John knew it was not the end. He had lived long enough to understand that silence often meant planning. Karen had stepped back for now, but she was not the kind of person to forget or forgive easily. Every evening, John found himself standing near the fence, his hand resting on the wooden posts. The fence looked ordinary to anyone passing by, but to John, it was something much more. It was a wall of protection, a reminder of freedom, and a line he had drawn firmly in the ground. One night, as the stars lit up the sky, John sat on his porch and let his mind drift back to the past. He remembered his father's strong hands, steady eyes, and a voice filled with quiet wisdom. His father was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, John always listened. Home, his father once told him, isn't just wood and bricks. It's where your heart rests. And when you protect your home, you're not only guarding walls, you're guarding peace, memories, and the people you love. Those words came back to John now, circling in his thoughts like a steady rhythm. He looked at the rifle resting on the mantel inside his living room. It was his father's rifle, polished but untouched for years. To John, it wasn't just an object. It was a symbol of his father's teaching, a tool of responsibility, not aggression. When John was a boy, his father had taught him how to handle it carefully. Never use it to scare, never use it to harm, his father had said. Carry it with respect. Its presence is enough if your heart is steady. That lesson shaped John's life. He learned that true strength wasn't about raising your voice or showing power, it was about calmness, patience, and the ability to stand firm when others tried to push you down. Now, as he thought about Karen and her endless demands, John realized he was living his father's lesson again. He wasn't looking for a fight. He wasn't looking to challenge anyone. He only wanted peace. But peace was not something given freely, it was something guarded carefully, like a flame in the wind. The following morning, John walked around his yard with quiet steps. The fence was strong, but he tightened a few nails anyway. He checked the hinges on his gate, making sure it swung smoothly. He even placed a fresh coat of paint on the birdhouse, smiling when a little sparrow hopped on top of it. These small acts gave him a sense of control, a way to remind himself that his home was his responsibility, no one else's. Across the street, Karen watched from her porch. She didn't call out this time, but John could feel her eyes on him. It was as if she was waiting, testing his patience. He gave her a polite nod, but she didn't return it. Instead, she turned her gaze away, her phone pressed to her ear. That afternoon, John invited his old friend Mark to visit. Mark lived a few miles away and often came by for coffee. As they sat on the porch, John shared what had happened: the folder, the demands, the strange men. Mark listened carefully, his brow furrowed. "John, you've always been calm, but I know you too well. This is bothering you." John gave a small smile. "It is. Not because I'm afraid, but because I see what it's turning into. Karen doesn't want harmony, she wants control. And I won't give up the little freedom I built here." Mark leaned back in his chair, nodding. "Your father would be proud. You're standing the way he taught you. Quiet, but unshaken." Those words settled in John's chest like a warm stone. He needed the reminder. Strength didn't always mean action. Sometimes, strength meant waiting, holding steady when others tried to push you over. That evening, when Mark left, John once again stood near the mantel. His eyes rested on the rifle. He didn't pick it up this time. He didn't need to. Just seeing it reminded him of who he was and what he believed in. It reminded him that peace had weight, and protecting it required courage. As the night deepened, a breeze passed through the trees, rustling the leaves gently. John stepped outside and looked at his fence under the moonlight. It looked almost alive, each wooden board glowing softly like a quiet soldier on guard. He whispered softly to himself, "This fence is more than wood. It's my promise." What John did not realize was that Karen, standing inside her home across the street, was making promises of her own. She was determined not to let him win. And while John found strength in his father's lessons, Karen was gathering her own strength in different ways. The quiet days did not last long. John had almost begun to believe that maybe Karen had given up when the trouble returned. It started on a Friday evening, just as the sun was setting and the street lamps began to flicker on. John was sitting on his porch with a book in his hands when he heard footsteps. He looked up and saw the same two men from before walking down the road, slower this time, as if they wanted him to notice. They carried no papers, no friendly greetings, just the same heavy stares that made the air feel colder. They stopped outside his fence again. The taller man tapped one of the posts with his finger, a faint smirk on his face. "Nice fence you got here," he said. "Strong. But fences don't keep everything out." John closed his book and stood. His face was calm, though his heartbeat was steady and strong. "What do you want?" he asked simply. The shorter man folded his arms. "Same as before. Join the HOA. Sign the papers. Do what Karen says. It's easier that way." John shook his head slowly. "I already told you I'm not under the HOA. My home is mine. I'll keep it clean, I'll keep it strong, but I won't follow rules that don't belong to me." The taller man leaned against the fence post, looking into John's yard as if testing how far he could go. "You're making this harder than it has to be. Everyone else follows the rules. You think you're better than them." John's voice remained steady. "No, I don't think I'm better. I just think I have the right to choose. The shorter man let out a sharp laugh. Choice? That's not how communities work. A community follows one path. And Karen's the one leading it. John placed his hands on the fence and leaned forward slightly. His voice was calm, but there was a firmness in it that could not be mistaken. A true community is built on respect, not fear. I respect my neighbors. I respect this land. But if you came here to scare me, you've wasted your time. The men exchanged glances, clearly frustrated that John wasn't reacting the way they wanted. The taller man finally spoke again, his tone sharper. You should think carefully, John. You can't stand against the whole neighborhood. John gave a small nod. Maybe not. But I can stand for what's right. And I will. For a long moment, silence filled the space between them. Then the two men stepped back, muttering to each other as they turned to leave. Their footsteps faded into the night, but their presence left a heavy weight behind. John sat back down on his porch, picking up his book, though he didn't read a single word. His mind was too restless. He thought of his father's words again, about peace being something that must be protected. He was not afraid of the men, but he worried about how far Karen would go. The next day, John decided to be proactive. He drove into town and stopped by the sheriff's office. Sheriff Daniels had known John for years, back when John was still working in the city. The sheriff greeted him with a warm smile. John, good to see you. What brings you here? John explained everything: Karen's demands, the folder of rules, the strange men who had come twice now. He kept his voice calm, not angry, just factual. Sheriff Daniels listened carefully, nodding from time to time. When John finished, the sheriff leaned back in his chair. I know Karen, he said slowly. She runs that HOA like a kingdom. But you're right, your property isn't under her. She has no legal power over you. Sending men to pressure you? That crosses a line. John felt a small relief hearing that. I don't want a fight, he said quietly. I just want peace. The sheriff gave a firm nod. And you'll have it? If they come back, you call me right away. Don't argue with them, don't waste your breath. Just call me. I'll take care of it. John thanked him and drove home, feeling lighter but still cautious. That evening, he checked his fence once again, running his hand along the wood. It stood tall, just as it always had, but now it felt like more than just a barrier. It felt like a shield, protecting not only his home but his right to live freely. As night fell, John sat on his porch, the rifle resting quietly inside his house, untouched but close. He didn't want to use it, but its presence reminded him that he was not helpless. His father's lessons echoed in his mind: strength isn't noise. Strength is calmness that doesn't break. Across the street, Karen stood in her window, watching. Her arms were folded, her face set in a frown. She had expected John to give in by now, but instead, he stood taller than ever. The next morning, John woke to the sound of birds chirping and a soft breeze moving through the trees. For a moment, the world felt calm again. He stepped outside to check his fence, brushing his hands along the smooth wood. The morning light made it glow warmly, almost as if it were encouraging him to stay strong. But calm did not last long. Around mid-morning, John noticed movement across the street. Karen was pacing on her porch, speaking quickly into her phone. Her gestures were sharp, and her voice carried across the quiet street. Something in her tone made John uneasy. She was planning, and he didn't like planning that involved him. As he watched, a familiar truck slowly drove up the road. It was the sheriff's truck. Sheriff Daniels stepped out, his tall frame moving with confidence and calm. He was wearing his uniform, badge shining faintly in the sun. John waved, and the sheriff nodded, walking toward him. "Morning, John," the sheriff said warmly, though his eyes were sharp. "I heard from the office that there might be trouble here." John gestured toward Karen. "It's her again. She's been sending people, trying to pressure me into joining her HOA. I don't want conflict, but I don't want to be bullied either." Sheriff Daniels nodded. "Let's make sure it stays peaceful. You did the right thing by calling me. I'll handle it before it gets out of hand." Together, they walked toward John's porch, and the sheriff stopped, looking carefully at the fence. "This is solid. It's more than a boundary, it's a statement. You're standing for your rights, and you're doing it calmly. That's important." John smiled faintly. "It's my father's lesson. Strength isn't in fighting, it's in staying calm and standing for what's right." The sheriff's face softened. "Exactly. And now you have some backup." Meanwhile, Karen noticed the sheriff on John's property. She froze for a moment, her hands gripping the railing of her porch. When she realized the sheriff was calmly talking with John, she frowned and quickly ended her call. Her plans were no longer secret, and she didn't like that. Sheriff Daniels raised a hand toward her. "Karen, I know you want things a certain way, but threatening neighbors or sending people to intimidate them is not allowed. John's property is his own, and he has every right to live freely." Karen's mouth opened, as if she wanted to argue, but the sheriff's steady gaze stopped her. "If you have concerns, there are legal ways to handle them. But this sending people is not one of them. You need to step back and respect boundaries." Karen muttered something under her breath, crossed her arms, and walked inside. The door closed quietly, leaving only the soft hum of the neighborhood. John let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Thank you, Sheriff. I didn't want it to come to this, but I felt cornered." Sheriff Daniels placed a reassuring hand on John's shoulder. "You handled it the right way. Calm, firm, and respectful. That's how you protect your home without causing trouble. The next time anyone comes near with the wrong intentions, you call me first. Don't engage. Let the law handle it." John nodded. "I will. It feels good to know someone has my back." The sheriff glanced at the fence again. "This fence is a symbol now. It's not just wood. It's your line. And you stood behind it? People respect that more than you know." John's eyes softened as he looked at the fence, feeling a quiet pride. It had been more than protection, it had been his voice. And now, with the sheriff's presence, it was also a shield of justice. The rest of the day passed with a calmness John had not felt in weeks. Birds sang in the yard, the sun cast gentle shadows across the grass, and the breeze whispered through the trees. John knew that Karen might try again, but for now, her power was limited by law and fairness. That evening, John sat on his porch with a cup of tea, watching the sunset. The sky turned shades of gold and pink, reflecting off his fence. He thought about the events of the past week, the men, the threats, the fear, and how calm action and patience had brought resolution. He realized something important: courage was not loud or aggressive. Courage was steady. Courage was showing up each day, respecting yourself and others, and standing firm when tested. Sheriff Daniels waved from the truck as he drove away, leaving John alone with the quiet of the neighborhood. John smiled to himself, feeling the weight of fear lift slightly. He had defended his home, his rights, and his peace not through anger, but through strength and calm. The fence, glowing faintly in the evening light, seemed to hum with quiet triumph. John whispered softly, "We stood together, you and I." And for the first time in many days, he felt a true sense of peace. But he also knew this was not the end. Karen might still challenge him in other ways, but now he had something stronger than worry. He had the law on his side, and he had learned the power of standing firm without hate or anger. The days that followed felt lighter for John. Karen had stopped pacing on her porch, at least for the moment, and the strange men had not returned. The neighborhood seemed calm, almost as if it had breathed a sigh of relief. But John knew better than to assume the threat was gone entirely. He had learned that standing firm required both patience and courage. Each morning, he went about his routines, watering the flowers, trimming the grass, and checking the fence. Every act of care felt like a small victory. The fence, strong and steady, had become more than just wood and nails. It was a symbol of his determination, a reminder that boundaries were important, and that peace was worth protecting. One afternoon, as John trimmed the edges of his lawn, he noticed a small group of neighbors gathering across the street. Among them was Mrs. Thompson, who lived 2 houses down, and Mr. Patel, who always tended to the community garden. They had been watching quietly as the events unfolded over the past weeks. Mrs. Thompson stepped forward with a gentle smile. "John, we've been watching how you've handled everything. Calm, respectful, and strong. It's impressive. You didn't argue, you didn't retaliate, you just stood your ground." John nodded humbly. "I only did what I thought was right. My home, my peace, that's all I wanted to protect." Mr. Patel added, "And in doing that, you've reminded all of us what it means to respect each other's space. Karen might not like it, but you've shown the right way to deal with conflict." John felt warmth spread in his chest. It was a quiet kind of recognition, but it mattered more than any argument or paper ever could. He realized that true community wasn't about everyone looking the same. It was about respect, kindness, and understanding that each person had their own way of living. That evening, the sheriff drove by again. Sheriff Daniels gave John a friendly wave and stopped for a moment. "Everything calm?" he asked. John nodded. "Yes, Sheriff. Everything seems peaceful now." "Good," the sheriff replied. "Remember, you did everything the right way. Standing firm without aggression, asking for help when needed, that's how we maintain peace. And now everyone can see it." As the sheriff drove away, John returned to his porch. The sun was setting, casting soft orange light across his yard. He looked at the fence, the birdhouse swinging gently in the breeze, and the small patch of flowers he had planted. All of it felt alive, not because of rules, but because of care, patience, and respect. John thought about Karen. She had tried to control and intimidate, but in the end, calmness and lawfulness had prevailed. He didn't feel anger toward her, instead, he felt a sense of clarity. People like her might always try to dominate, but peace and respect could stand against them, quietly and firmly. That night, John sat on his porch with a cup of tea, listening to the crickets and the gentle rustle of leaves. He reflected on everything he had learned over the past few weeks. Courage was quiet. Strength was calm. True freedom came not from winning battles, but from protecting what mattered with patience and care. As darkness settled over the neighborhood, lights flickering in windows, John smiled. The fence had held. His home had remained a place of peace. and he had learned that even when others tried to impose their will, standing firm with integrity always made a difference. Weeks later, life returned to its normal rhythm. Karen remained in her home, keeping her rules to herself. She no longer sent strangers to pressure John. Whether out of caution or realization, she seemed to have accepted his choice, though she never admitted it aloud. John's yard flourished. The birdhouse now had a small family of sparrows, and the flowers he planted bloomed in bright colors, a quiet celebration of freedom and care. Children from the neighborhood sometimes wandered by, curious and happy to see the little birds. He smiled at them, enjoying the simple moments that made a house a home. One evening, John walked to the fence and rested his hands on the top. The wood was smooth, warm from the day's sunlight. He whispered softly, almost to himself, "We stood our ground. And we did it the right way." It wasn't about winning or defeating anyone. It was about respect, peace, and protecting the things that mattered most. His home, his freedom, and his peace had been defended not by anger or force, but by patience, care, and quiet courage. As he walked back inside, the stars twinkling overhead, John felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The fence had not only marked his property, it had marked a new beginning, a promise that standing up for yourself could be done with grace, and that justice and calm could prevail even in the face of pressure. And with that, John sat by his window, looking out at the quiet neighborhood, feeling a profound sense of freedom and contentment. The house was safe, the fence strong, and his heart at peace.